taken aback by the stunning quality of the wood and how she's taken a hard medium and out of this hard mediums come this organic fragility. And these pieces right here are just stunning.
The pieces are absolutely beautiful, and it's just amazing how she can carve rocks just like wood.
Whenever I go for a walk, I like to pick up things that I find that have fallen off a tree or dried at the end of a stem. And it's like this artist went home, has done the same thing. She's gone home and then she makes them really big. And they're so organic and natural, and they're really beautiful.
Barbara Stanczak is an artist for whom I have enormous respect, and the more of her work that I see, the more of it I love.
An artist has to do everything, has to be able to do anything, solve problems, do it. And that versatility of doing everything came in extremely handy, and it definitely was taught from the very beginning. My mother was a goldsmith. Being around my uncles and aunts and grandfather, it influenced my life. You learn to improvise being around artists. You learn to be independent, both in thinking and in material possessions. You can do without it, you can make your own, you can find your ways. You want to give somebody a present, you make it. You want to show something, you make it. You do everything, be it leather or cloth or stone or wood or mosaic or fresco painting. There was no question of, how do you do this? I don't know how to do it. You just do it, and you learn doing it by doing it. And there's no inhibition of capitalizing or finding areas that you protect that are your own. You have a certain comfort for everything. I've started looking back at the artists in the family because they went back, as I realized then, generations of carvers and painters and printmakers. My father's families were very, very different, and I didn't really know much about them until it was too late to ask my parents the questions because they were not there. But they are photographs, and relatives tried to explain to me what happened in these images. And this one's grandfather and his older brother being in the academy to learn how to paint, and then specifically how to fresco paint. So it was a school of religious painting more than anything else. And it was a very, very strict learning or upbringing because they had to live in that place from age 14 on. So, and when they got a little bit older, they would go on Wanderjahre. They would go sent into the world. They had to travel to the museums by foot, to Italy, to Prague, to the different countries, and paint the masterpieces in the castles and churches. It's a tough way of learning by doing it and by surviving with your skill that you have learned. And then you become part of an apprenticeship of becoming part of the commission of the master. I think altogether grandfather painted about 600 churches, many in this country and many in Europe, throughout Europe. This is one of the paintings in Luxembourg that grandfather, probably one of his first official commitments or consignments, assignments that he did. This is a ceiling, but there are also side windows and altarpieces, but beautifully painted in the old traditional style of depicting the heroes from the Bible. On my mother's side, they were all sculptors. There's Uncle Ludwig in Berlin, and then there's Uncle Lawrence in Munich. Both were sculptors, one being more in wood, the other one more in large outdoor sculptures in bronze. This is my grandmother and the family. My mother on the bottom and the older brothers and sisters. A very strict religious upbringing. I think that's very typical of the time. Her family were the Carvers. The two brothers, grandfather and his brother, Uncle Hans, married two sisters of a Munich carving family, wood carvers, famous wood carvers. And so both the carving and the painting, I think, became part of my heritage. This is grandfather with the first motorized vehicle in Münster, and 4 of the 5 children there. He must have been quite a mischievous guy. He probably put half of it together himself. You think it, you do it. Here's grandmother and grandfather's family and the children. That's grandmother, but what I like about the picture, it is the house we moved in later on, except the painting that is now on the walls and over the windows that were done by grandfather and perhaps the children were not there anymore. It was just painted white. But it still is the same solid house except with the flair of the time. My mother, this is probably when she was about 20 years old. I can see her jewelry and her stitchery and her reading. She was a very sensitive, intellectual person. She wanted to make a living with her art, which was goldsmithing, which didn't quite work out. After she graduated from art school, she moved in and opened a goldsmith shop in Berlin. And uncle, the grandfather's brother, Uncle Ludwig, lived in Berlin and worked as a very established artist. He always worked from animals in the wild. He was responsible for the elk herd outside Berlin, so he would be there doing both his watercolors and his clay models that then were transferred into large, or many of them life-size sculptures for the bronze casting. The Madonna in the back is in the London Museum. There is my mother in really the living room of my uncle in Berlin. She lived with them, helped them, and at the same time had her shop, which she tried for 3 or 4 years in Berlin, which was an exciting time intellectually, the early 20s, with all the big writers, comedians, and really intellectuals at that time in Berlin. But her shop didn't seem to have worked successfully. At least she started to re-gear and went back to the university to become a physician, which for us was lucky, because if she would have stayed a goldsmith during the war, we would have all starved. But being a physician, there was always something. My mother then was at the Münster school to study medicine. My father was at the Münster school studying theology, but somehow when they met one another, all the theology was forgotten and they got married. And had altogether 3 children. My mother took care of us by herself. There were happy days when you dressed up, but most of the time it was very difficult to find things both to eat or to live or to dress. My father came back in 1947 from prisoner of war camp in America. He was very sick and took a while, but he was so happy to be with us, and we were so happy to have a father, since we had missed his kindness and gentleness all these years. He helped, but he was very fragile, both mentally and physically. My mother, being the physician, had the Red Cross as the physician sign, that people really of all nationalities, the soldiers from Russian or British, would come, as well as the injured of the German population. From the country we moved to the city where my mother had the property from grandfather, that old house that was very badly damaged by the bombs, but at least we could be on the ground, and my parents built together a small wooden house where we lived. Again, quite poorly, and everybody had to help, but we grew up, I think, with a lot of animals and a lot of discipline, but also the pleasure of having a garden and the freedom to climb trees and be in nature. And to have brothers and sisters was a treat. When we were in the countryside, you were surrounded by animals, wild animals. We had dogs, puppies, strays, but we also experienced being chased by the wild horse or wild pigs. With that we saw the deer and the little creatures, but we played in the creek, we enjoyed being out, and we were pretty much let loose because my mother was always going to her patients, and we were taking care of ourselves and entertaining ourselves with what nature gifted to us. In the city in Münster, since the country had not educated us properly, it was a one-room schoolhouse. We had a lot of catching up to do, both on subject matter, reading, writing, and arithmetic, but also on the religious education. So my brother and I had First Communion together. My mother prepared us, but the bishop was there, and I led the procession from the bishopric to our church. Because I was the smallest, so they thought it was cute to have such a little one leading the procession with a candle. Shortly after that, I remember it was the last time we really were together. My father died of brain cancer. Said he had been very sickly after the war. He had been teaching in another city from us, so we really saw him only in the weekend. But I remember him helping me with my schoolwork and being so patient and loving, and he was really the motherly person in the family, while my mother was the decision maker and the coordinator and the one that got things done and accomplished. We missed my father very much, all three of us. I pretty much retreated to the animals instead of to the people. The animals that was easy to communicate with, be it the dogs, the squirrels, the pigeons, or the crow. I have found memories of from my youth, being free to make the other animals whole and give them a pleasure of interacting and watching that interacting. Since my father's death, my mother had a hard time to take care of her business and providing the money, having the patients in the house, and the three of us. So my sister and I had to go to a religious boarding school where we were tried to teach the right manners and the right female behavior and the right attitude toward life. It was a very big transition, not only because we both missed the physical freedom, but also the psychological freedom of doing and thinking what we wanted. We couldn't read what we want, we couldn't think what we want. But I found a sister who had also a very unusual life. She was the sister of von Schulenburg, who made the attentat, the attempt to kill Hitler. So her background was very political. 4 or 5 of her brothers had been hanged. She had escaped to England. She worked with Henry Moore. She was his student and helper for several years. She became a wonderful nun because she was understanding of other thoughts and other needs. And she was a sculptress, and she let me do in the studio everything that I wanted, be it from the little casts or clay work or sculpting, making dishes, embossing metal. I could always escape to her studio and to the school studio, and that was where I found that I felt most comfortable in just doing. I didn't need other people, I didn't need anything but being occupied with my vision to realize something. So I think if it wouldn't be for her to give me the psychological support and the freedom to be there, I would not have discovered that I wanted to be an artist, even though I had all the history, but I wasn't aware of it. Now I felt an association of belonging. This is the last photo of me in Germany. Our dog had puppies. It's a little precious bundle I have in my arms. That's my passport photo. Since in art school I had gotten some prizes to go to Sweden, which my mother thought was not a good place for me to go. She let me go to America to help grandfather, who was going blind at this point in time. He came from Germany in 1924 with his whole family, first to Milwaukee, where some bishops had commissioned him that knew his work, probably of German ancestry, and commissioned him to do several churches. He worked in Chicago, he worked in Washington, D.C. Many of the churches he painted are now a historic document and cultural document of the times and of the skills of these artists. This is the first image of me in grandfather's garden, and I found a tiny little bunny. And I found a home for quite a few years with grandfather. He was living in Cincinnati in Price Hill. His eyes were giving up with bad cataracts, but he knew his skill and he taught his skill to me. It is traditional, just the materials and the layering and the underpainting and the skill of working fast because the cement is drying and the paints, the layers of paints have to set together with the cement. You can't correct, but again, I saw it as being pretty free of doing what I like to do. Grandfather liked what I did, and he could always fix the little detail. So again, it was an exploration more than anything else, an opportunity. We were a nice team. I enjoyed it. I learned a lot to participate, to be part of a teamwork. I felt good being part of the family. After I finished helping him in Cincinnati with the commissions that he had had, I tried the art school, the local art school, and to my surprise, I was accepted. A great surprise and a wonderful surprise. And the next wonderful thing that happened, I found a teacher that I really loved and that was attracted to me too. And I found Julian Stanczak, who was my painting teacher. We got married in 1963 after I graduated from the art school. This is in Münster. We had just a family wedding in a small chapel, but it was beautiful. Beginning of a new history, a new life and a new history. Mm-hmm.
I remember the innocence of a young person coming to this country and not knowing the country, and this exuberance of trying to come in touch with the life in America. So I remember her from that point of view. So everything would be new, and anything that would enter to her mind, she would approach it with the full enthusiasm. I wanted to be a part of its actions. That's what I remember. As a student, well, that's what it is nice about the student. I wanted the student to be alive, the open-eyed person, the one who is curious about things, not assuming I know already, but how much I don't know. And there are fascinations of life that I would like to resolve for my own sake, at least, before I can share, if I can. So I find the ways to do it as I keep on going on. One has to find one's own inner strength. And that was my responsibility as a teacher, in order to offer the inner power of the individual to that individual.
Julian was one of my teachers. He taught painting and drawing and color theory. And he was the best teacher I ever had. He was essential for my development. Being very acutely aware and intellectually aware of anything you put, 16th of an inch, quarter of an inch this way, really weighing amounts, textures, and colorants against one another, and very crucially. It definitely educationally was good, but artistically it wasn't me.
I love this stark opposite between Julian and Barbara. Julian is a scientist of color interactions and what effects they bring, and he says that he never experiments. He has it in his head. He thinks and he knows, and then he does, and what comes out is what he had imagined. So it is conceived before it becomes body. And Barbara has an outline and the spirit of the thing, and then she has to constantly adjust and listen to this as if the thing's whispered to her. And I find this contrast just wonderful. Two such great artists with such totally different attunedness to what they have to do.
My work is different, yes, because of emotional aspect, introductory aspect, which usually it is emotional. You know, it stands on the way of logic. So in order to progress, we have to progress through understanding, not through the build-up, volume of emotions. So the question is, how do I go through the eclectic collection of things around as my experiences? She does it well.
I'm a material person. I love textures. I love anything you can touch and make grow or share. I love light. And I think that was the painting materials that I chose were always dry pigments, graphite, mica, always mixed media that was dealing with light absorption or light reflection, light diffusion. So light and space, because soon my paintings would get elevated and more elevated and more elevated. And then that's dealing with shadows and with paintings that were all white but had at different angles reflected surfaces. So you would have indirect light and indirect color on the paintings. So light was a priority, space, illusion of space, flattening space, redirecting space, those were my priorities, and they really are a thread through my work. If I think back from jewelry to mosaic to even the frescoes, to the sculpture that I did, to the reliefs, it always dealt with space, texture, and light.
She always wanted to do big things, but there's not energy or time to work on large pieces. And then discovering the fascination of visual stimuli, in the rocks, in the transluciveness of some of those pieces, how the light composes the units, offers the grandeur of space, how the undulation of a surface, finding the shapes, edges to contain it. Well, they are very fascinating, all the time absorbing. It's not intellectually first. It is a freedom of response first. All art is being by provocation of a mind. Then we spend mind looking at it and adding to it. If we say, oh, I have seen it already. Oh, that reminds me of this or that. Some people can go through life through a rejection. She doesn't.
I love the interaction between the natural components of the materials and the questing intelligence of the mind that is finding form and finding shape, and to a certain extent maybe even imposing form and shape. It's there's a dance. There's a dance that goes on between deriving and making that exists, and I think it's that dance that provides a sort of fascinating energy, a fascinating tension that again draws us in.
I try to please myself and have fun. And I have fun working hard. I have fun being physical. I have fun seeing things emerge. I'm fun solving problems, because stone and wood have problems. They always give you nothing but problems. But you have to, in order to have a finished work, you have to use those problems as assets, as possibilities, as guidance to, hey, what else is possible? And you don't see the problems anymore. They just direct your path differently than your preconception might have, or your desire. So you become less selfish too. So as soon as you come with a big will and say, I want to do this with it, it will throw something in your path and it won't be possible anymore. So you go with it instead of either dictating or being stubborn about something. Two-dimensional surface that has no ego, it's nothing, and you have to add everything. This comes halfway with stumbling blocks, yes, but it has never. It always works out to the better somehow if you give in, not follow the lead, but cooperate.
It's always a collaboration. You have a plan, you have an idea of what you're going to accomplish, but then there are realities that emerge, and you have to. it's not that you're compromising your plan, but you're deriving maybe even enhanced value from the opportunities that arise out of the materials as you discover the dimensions and the characteristics of those materials. So it can be better. It should be better. You start, and what you end up with is better than what you ever anticipated.
Try to submerge yourself totally in it, to become almost part of it, to sense what it wants. You work intuitively instead of direct. You look at a stone, and there's already a love affair. Hey, there's something possible. I like that shape, I like that color, I like the way it sits. It provokes you to attempt something, to dare something. And you follow that to a certain degree. This is possible to make this a kind of movement or stance or tension. You have an idea of what you want, but it's not defined by inches, or it's not defined strong enough that you cannot go with it. Again, say, okay, that's what you allow, that's what you don't allow. So it's a give and take in all things, and it furthers both. It's a synthesis between my idea, my will or muscle, and its possibilities within it. I take the problems, both the problems that I make or the foolish decisions that I might make, and take it as a stepping point to something else.
Barbara has been a longtime faculty member at CIA.
I have first-hand witnessed, seen, observed, and profited from Barbara as a teacher in the foundation class. And I can say without doubt that she is the one who pushes the students the most to really be attentive to everything, their material, and try a little bit better, try a little bit better. She's really an excellent teacher.
She has been just one of our absolute anchors for generations of our students who have just benefited so greatly from her love of art, her grasp of materials, her rigor, her humanity. She was a real jewel in the CIA crown.
I love teaching. It gives me, again, a sense of totality, a sense of giving, a sense of sharing of what I've accumulated, and giving the young people the sense of freedom that they can get through mastery of something, anything, and then expressing it. The challenge is perhaps trying to see them for who they are without trying to see them through my eyes, wanting them to be what they perhaps not aren't yet. Everything we do is sort of filtered through our own experiences, and I don't want to impose what I think they are instead of seeing them for what they are and lifting them up or guiding them. Or most of the time it's presenting them to themselves, making them see who they are, because I struggled for so long before I really dared to do what comes natural to me. So I try to really help them see what is their heritage, what comes easy, what gives them pleasure, what do they spend the most time with, in order to find out, in order to give them to themselves. Really, that's a revelation. And when they go through high school, they never thought about themselves. They do the job that is required. But as young artists, you have to find a basis to stand on.
The students have been influenced by someone who they know in the classroom and they know in the gallery. That the person who is teaching them speaks with the authority of an artist who is every day dealing with the very questions that he or she is telling the students that they must be asking themselves. There's an authority there that simply, for which there is no substitute.
It's not easy, especially for any female. It's more difficult because the competition is very, very poignant, especially in the field of creative field, visual field, music, whatever, you know. And this competition is draining. But if you have a family and other obligations, you have to be divided. And to divide, not necessarily one has the stamina of facing it. So she did very well with ups and downs, as human nature is involved, raising the family or trying to take care of the family, being in a flux of a change, and there are always a moment you can carve the territory just for yourself, you know, just 1 hour or 2 hours a day. Maybe it's more because you can capsulize what you want, wishes and so on come up, and you know exactly what you want to do, so you use the time economically.
My main mission in life was really to make it possible for Julian to paint. And it worked out that way, that I could take care of the family, the house, the rest that needs taken care of so that he can paint. And I always managed to squeeze some time to do my own thing. And that was important for my equilibrium. I need to know who I am or where I'm going, so I pursued my own work, be it studies or my own execution of work. So I'm juggling that. But it is secondary to the primary aspect of life, is seeing that he can flawlessly do what he has to do, that is paint.
The artistic temperament is useful in any field. The idea that there are more interesting ways of answering a question or solving a problem, it's what the arts are about. It seems to me that an engineer being exposed to art, a physician being exposed to art, scientists being exposed to art, it forces them to touch on the other side of the brain, the less logical side of the brain.
The artist preserves that sense of playful what if, playing with materials, playing with reality throughout life, which is creative thinking. You ask what if, you apply a process to it, you test it, you see what it becomes. That's what happens in science, that's what happens in art.
It's creative problem solving, and that's what art is. The art of living is an art form too, the art of surviving, and the art of dealing creatively with any problems.
There is an eternal youth and an eternal optimism to engaging with the artistic life, that it keeps you forever young. And that spirit of exploration and excitement never ends, and that they are blessed and privileged to be engaging in a way of life that promotes constant exploration and constant discovery and constant giving.
I think the art of life is essential to be lived fully aware, being totally aware of every moment, of the impetus and the potentials that are within those relationships.